Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Wednesday, May the 12th, 2021. Let's see. Let's start with the Daily Mail. The president's mental and physical condition cannot be ignored. More than 120 retired generals and admirals signed open letter questioning Biden's mental health and backing election fraud claims. Oh, dear. Colonial Pipeline pumps gas again after Russian cyber attack shuts it down for 6 days. Trump mocks Biden as worse than Carter after up to two-thirds of stations in southern states run dry. And what was the story that I saw that the fellow who shot 3 people in Times Square was found in Florida in his car, which had run out of gas because of the pipeline hacking. That pretty much sums up 2021, does it not? But let's talk about a martyr, one of the greatest martyrs of our age, and that would be Liz Cheney. Bye, Liz. This is from Scott Wong and Mike Lillis at The Hill. Sorry about that. It's a bit close in here. In an extraordinary bow, extraordinary to former President Trump, House Republicans voted Wednesday to purge GOP conference chairwoman Liz Cheney from her leadership post, punishing the conservative Wyoming Republican for daring to refute Trump's lie that the 2020 election was stolen. The decision was made by a voice vote, meaning that there will be no tally of the lawmakers who voted to dump Cheney or of those who wanted her to stay on. Sources inside the closed-door vote said it was an overwhelming vote against Cheney. Some guess the split was 3-1. That represents a remarkable shift from a similar challenge to her leadership status in February when she won handily. And it marked the first time in recent memory that a congressional GOP leader was toppled by rank-and-file Republicans in the middle of their term through a formal vote. Trump was not on Wednesday's ballot, but he was the elephant in the room as Cheney's colleagues voted to condemn her for what has become an unpardonable sin in today's Republican Party, calling out the former president for his repeated falsehoods about his election defeat. You can't have a conference chair who recites Democrat talking points, said Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, former head of the conservative House Freedom Caucus and a close Trump ally. Yet not all conservatives agreed. Representative Ken Buck of Colorado, another Freedom Caucus member, was a rare conservative supporting Cheney, a sharp critic of cancel culture. Buck warned after the vote that Republicans likely alienated voters who agree with Cheney's criticisms of Trump, or at least her right to air them from a position of leadership. Yes, the whole nation, the whole American nation is simply agog at the saga of Liz Cheney. Liz didn't agree with President Trump's narrative, and she was canceled, Buck said. She still remains a member of the House of Representatives, strangely enough. We have to deal with this narrative at some point. There are major issues, the border, spending. There are major issues. But to suggest that the American people in 2022 won't consider the fact that we were unwilling to stand up to a narrative that the election was stolen, I think will be taken into consideration with their vote. Yes, I'm sure it will be. There's a burning anger in the hearts of Americans over the treatment of poor Liz Cheney. Amid all the attacks, Cheney has not backed down. I will do everything I can to ensure that the former president never again gets anywhere near the Oval Office, Cheney said before a bank of TV cameras after the vote. She repeated the same message in a speech to GOP colleagues on Wednesday, just moments before they cast her out. If you want leaders who will enable and spread Trump's destructive lies, I'm not your person. You will have plenty of others to choose from. That will be their legacy. She then asked her colleagues to pray with her for the protection of American democracy and recited scripture. Help us to speak the truth and remember the words of John 8:32. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Sailing a bit close to the wind there, Liz. Senator John Kennedy backs House Republicans' ouster of Liz Cheney, claiming it's because she isn't concentrating on the GOP's agenda to stop Biden and his neo-socialist tendencies. She hit a wasp's nest with a short stick, to which Fox anchor John Roberts replied, "No question about that." Kennedy added, "The Congresswoman has every right to her opinion. She doesn't have every right to be a leader, and it's clear to me that many House Republicans want to concentrate on the Biden agenda in 2022, and she doesn't want to do that." Liz Cheney had said, "Remaining silent and ignoring the lie emboldens the liar. I will not participate in that. I will not sit back and watch in silence while others lead our party down a path that abandons the rule of law and joins the president's crusade to undermine our democracy. Today, we face a threat America has never seen before. A former president who provoked a violent attack on this Capitol in an effort to steal the election has resumed his aggressive effort to convince Americans that the election was stolen from him." We're back to Schrodinger's cat again, because the narrative is that American elections, presidential elections, cannot be stolen. Well, by definition. Jordan Davidson writes, in The Federalist, House Republicans boot warmonger Liz Cheney from party leadership. I really think that has to be a big part of the reason why she got the boot, is because she is a warmonger. She's never met a forever war that she didn't like. And one of the primary reasons why they never Trumpers were so never Trump is because they saw that Trump had no appetite for forever wars. Trump had said that Cheney was a bitter, horrible human being. She is a talking point for Democrats, whether that means the border, the gas lines, inflation, or destroying our economy. She is a warmonger whose family stupidly pushed us into the never-ending Middle East disaster, draining our wealth and depleting our great military, the worst decision in our country's history. I look forward to soon watching her as a paid contributor on CNN or MSDNC. According to the New York Times, Cheney embraces her downfall, warning GOP of Trump in a fiery speech. Yes, the strange new respect syndrome that Tom Bethel and Joe Sobran wrote about. Oh, the Democrats and the media, they love Liz Cheney now. Such embarrassing concern trolling. Glenn Greenwald tweeted, Chuck Schumer heralds Liz Cheney as a hero for speaking truth to power and actually compares her to Sir Thomas More, a literal saint who was executed for his refusal to submit to the authority of Henry VIII. Greenwald followed up with a rather strange tweet. Lots of people saying that Sir Thomas More is not an actual saint in the Catholic Church, though many consider him to be saintly. It's ancillary to the point and beyond any expertise I have, so I'm just noting the objections. Well, it is a matter of fact that Thomas More was canonized by Pope Pius XI in 1935. That's not difficult information to find. Oh, and a bombshell story, again from the New York Times. Over 100 Republicans, including former officials, threatened to split from the GOP. Oh dear, the center cannot hold. You've been hearing that from Yates a lot lately. Too much, in fact. Zach Montague reports that more than 100 Republicans, including some former elected officials, are preparing to release a letter this week threatening to form a third party if the Republican Party does not make certain changes, according to an organizer of the effort. The statement is expected to take aim at former President Donald Trump's stranglehold on Republicans, which signatories to the document have deemed unconscionable. When in our democratic republic forces of conspiracy, division, and despotism arise, it is the patriotic duty of citizens to act collectively in defense of liberty and justice, reads the preamble to the full statement, which is expected to be released Thursday. Conspiracy, division, despotism. You mean like the Russiagate coup attempt? You mean the attempt by Obama and the Department of Justice to knock Trump out of the box in 2016 based on a fake dossier? You mean any of that kind of stuff? This is a first Trump step, says Miles Taylor, an organizer of the effort, and a former Trump-era Department of Homeland Security official who anonymously wrote a book condemning the Trump administration. In October, Taylor acknowledged he was the author of both the book and a 2018 New York Times op-ed article. This is us saying that a group of more than 100 prominent Republicans think the situation has gotten so dire with the Republican Party that it is now time to seriously consider whether an alternative might be the only option. It would appear that the neocons and the, how does this go, fiscally conservative, socially liberal types are exiling themselves from the Republican Party. Excellent news. Taylor declined to name the signers. Reuters reported earlier that former governors Tom Ridge of Pennsylvania and Christine Todd Whitman of New Jersey will sign it, as will former Transportation Secretary Mary E. Peters. That's certainly a bombshell. And former Representatives Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania, Barbara Comstock of Virginia, Reed Ribble of Wisconsin, and Mickey Edwards of Oklahoma. Taylor declined Tuesday to reveal the specific changes that the coalition was planning to demand of the Republican Party in its statement. I'm still a Republican, but I'm hanging on by the skin of my teeth because how quickly the party has divorced itself from truth and reason. I'm one of those in the group that feels very strongly that if we can't get the GOP back to a rational party that supports free minds, free markets, and free people, I'm out, and a lot of people are coming with me. Oh, the Reason crowd is going to desert the Republican Party, that massive group of libertarian supporters within the Republican Party. What a tragedy, indeed, that would be for the GOP. This, let me go back to the Daily Mail here, because I was really rather taken aback by this. This is from Jeff Earl at the Daily Mail. A group of more than 120 retired military officers have written President Joe Biden to tell him his election was less than legitimate, while questioning his mental acuity. Without fair and honest elections that accurately reflect the will of the people, our constitutional republic is lost, the letter from retired officers say. The group calls itself Flag Officers for America and consists of retired military officers, including generals and admirals. That is really quite something. Now, of course, I'm duty-bound to tell you that Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. was the legitimate winner of the 2020 presidential election. But it appears that this issue is not dead. Here's a paragraph from the letter. Using the U.S. military as political pawns, with thousands of troops deployed around the U.S. Capitol building, patrolling fences, guarding against a non-existent threat, along with forcing politically correct policies like the divisive critical race theory into the military at the expense of the war-fighting mission, seriously degrades readiness to fight and win our nation's wars, creating a major national security issue. We must support our military and vets, focus on war fighting, eliminate the corrosive infusion of political correctness into our military, which damages morale and war fighting cohesion. I saw a video that what the U.S. Army put out. Perhaps you've seen it. It's a cartoon of a young woman who was raised by two mommies. And one of these mommies had an accident and then was paralyzed and then learned to walk again. And she was in a sorority in college, but she felt that, what was she doing? And some of her classmates, one had climbed Mount Everest, making her the 29,302nd person to climb Mount Everest, and possibly the 9,737th woman to climb Mount Everest. And another one had gone to India. How about that? But she decided to join the U.S. Army, and this is exactly the sort of person that the U.S. Army apparently wants, demands, which is a woman, not only a woman, of course, because women are so much better at fighting than men, but a woman who was raised by two mommies. Yes, that is certainly going to do wonders. There's a piece in The Federalist by Molly Hemingway. If questioning the results of a presidential election were a crime, as many have asserted in the wake of the controversial 2020 election and its aftermath, nearly the entire Democratic Party and media establishment would have been incarcerated for their rhetoric following the 2016 election. In fact, the last time they accepted the legitimacy of a presidential election they lost was in 1988. After the 2000 election, which hinged on the results of a recount in Florida, Democrats smeared President George W. Bush as selected, not elected. When Bush won re-election against then-Senator John Kerry in 2004, many on the left claimed that voting machines in Ohio had been rigged to deliver fraudulent votes to Bush. But we know that that's not possible. HBO even produced and aired Hacking Democracy, a democracy that added fuel to the conspiracy theory of fire of conversations about the 2004 results. But nothing holds a candle to what happened in 2016 after Trump's surprising defeat of former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Rather than accept that Trump won and Clinton lost, the political and media establishments desperately sought to explain away Trump's victory. What they settled on was a destructive conspiracy theory that crippled the government, empowered America's adversaries, and illegally targeted innocent private citizens whose only crime was not supporting Hillary Clinton. With baseless claims of hacked voting totals, illegal voter suppression, and extensive media manipulation, the Russian collusion hoax had it all. But more than anything, the belief that Trump stole the 2016 election had the support of the most powerful institutions, individuals, and even government agencies in the country. You can run the best campaign, and you can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you, Clinton told her followers in 2019. I know he's an illegitimate president, Clinton claimed of Trump a few months later. Trump lost the election and was put into office because the Russians interfered on his behalf, Jimmy Carter said in 2019. Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. Their view was widely shared by most prominent Democrats in Congress. Representative John Lewis of Georgia, for example, said he was skipping Trump's inauguration in 2016 because he believed Trump was illegitimate and that the Russians participated in helping this man get elected. And many, many such cases. But what I was thinking was, suppose you actually believed that the election had been stolen. What would you do? Now, what we hear from the media and the Democratic Party and the elite is that this is literally not possible. Well, if it's literally not possible, then this is an open inducement for people to actually do that, because any claims that it has happened will be rejected reflexively. No, that is not possible. Of course, when the Democrats charge the same thing, well, not my president, or when Stacey Abrams repeated for months after she lost the race for Georgia governor in 2018, that she was the actual legitimate governor of Georgia. I don't recall her being unpersoned for some reason, which doesn't come to mind right now. Let's take a look at the chat. Hello to random number generator. Dan, Palcasso 88, roulette cracked, buddy. Let's see, Kevin, good evening from sunny Midwest USA. Play ball, sun was 2 for 4 last night. Glad to hear it. Oh, yes, Russian hackers. Hello to Yo Mama and Head McNeck. So glad to finally get off work before the stream started. It's the good old days. Well, thank you for that. Hello to Bones Eye. And who else do we have here? Texas Feral Hog. Yes, Liz Cheney, of course, is the daughter of Dick Cheney, one of the most singularly charmless people in the history of American politics, who was vice president or co-president, if you will, for 8 years. And of course, Liz Cheney's rise to ascendancy in the Republican Party, now thwarted, is in no way evidence that America has become a hereditary oligarchy. Roulette Crack says, how did they ever put her in that post in the first place? Their ignorance is staggering. Why is so much of the Republican Party just a wing of the Democrats? Because that's the only thing that's allowed. Vanilla Gorilla says Glenn Greenwald is more of a Christian gentleman than most conservative politicians. I wonder if Vanilla Gorilla means that term without irony. I remember it from a Kingsley Amis novel, the second one, where the use of the phrase Christian gentleman with regard to Francisco Franco roused him to fury, and he would use the term as a term of insult. Hello to Professor Paul. Ed McNeck says, will we get to the point where the federal government can simply outlaw the existence of a certain inconvenient political parties as certain European nations are wont to? I'm not so sure it is paranoia. Well, there's certainly, look at the lockdown skeptics, the vaccine skeptics, the mask skeptics. There are efforts, including officially by the Ontario Medical Association, to punish them for speaking their opinions. Roulette Crack says, if they split, the neocon logo should be a dinosaur. And, okay, Don Willis says, no mercy will be shown. The Brian Blessed YouTube video about having a what at 26,000 feet on Everest is amusing, says Ann Run. Brian Blessed, eh? Here other stout man. Was he not? Kevin using all his willpower to avoid using the D word, says Roulette Cracked. Rutherford B. Hayes, this is an American tradition, says Gamiston. Yes, that was talked about a great deal in January and February. There was a contested election, and it was a compromise, which resulted in the end of Reconstruction in the South. Palpcasso 88 says Story and Zero Hedge said that 71% of millennials and Zoomers unfit for military service, too fat, criminal record, etc. Hello to G's Heat Stahl. Kevin, do you appreciate the art of base stealing as much as you should? I suppose I do. As you probably know, I haven't watched any baseball, this professional baseball this year, because I'm boycotting it. Because of baseball going full Black Lives Matter. Oh, I see. Anran was talking about Brian Blessed evacuating his bowels at 26,000 feet. He didn't make it to the summit. Roulette Crack says, a lot of women get to the top of Everest without incident, but then die taking selfies. I especially love the double blast on the horn because the sirens aren't enough. There's a huge garbage problem at Mount Everest now because of God knows how many people, still going to the top of it and leaving their detritus everywhere. Oh, okay. Again, from the Daily Mail. Representative Paul Gosar claims Capitol Police executed rioter Ashley Babbitt just steps from the House floor, and former Pentagon chief refuses to blame Trump during heated congressional hearing. As I say, strangely enough, this story is not dying. Christopher Miller defended decisions he made on January 6th amid criticism it took troops too long to arrive. He refused to blame Trump's speech for inciting riot, instead saying elements in crowd were already planning a Capitol attack. Representative Stephen Lynch accused Miller of reversing position mid-testimony. Gosar called Ashley Babbitt a young lady, a veteran wrapped in an American flag that was killed in the U.S. Capitol. Well, I'm glad to see that there are some members of the Republican Party who have some brains, because the Democrats have announced plans to pretty much eliminate the Republican Party. And groveling is not going to help them, because it doesn't, because all must be absorbed. Revolver.news notes the appearance of a book by John Mueller called The Stupidity of War, American Foreign Policy and the Case for Complacency. America's longest war is finally coming to an end. President Biden announced last month that all U.S. troops will be out of Afghanistan by the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Revolver is happy to see any leader, regardless of party, complete President Trump's goal to end America's longest and most fruitless forever war. But don't celebrate yet. Once the war is actually over, the deep state will be happy to reignite it in an instant, or else hunt for a new one to begin in some other unfortunate country. And that's assuming the war ends at all. Until the last U.S. boot is out of Afghanistan, the American deep state may find a way to prolong the war. They're fighting hard to do it right now, using the recent bombing of a girls' school in Kabul to agitate for a longer war. The Taliban has condemned the bombing and strenuously denied involvement. No matter, the deep state is happy to use whatever bodies it can find, so long as it means more war. This pattern will continue until there's a fundamental overhaul of America's entire defense and foreign policy establishment. To save America from one ruinous war after another, we must stop falling for the Pentagon and State Department's tricks. Instead, it's time for a new strategy to fund the military intelligence complex that has led the country to ruin. Oh, yes. Who has suffered the most because of COVID-19? Could it be BIPOCs? We have a new contender, and this is from the New York Times. And is the New York Times actually written and published for people, or for people who aren't deranged, or for serious people? Here's this headline. Alphabet people fear invisibility in COVID-19 vaccine data. Unlike with racial and ethnic data, the collection of sexual orientation and gender identity data is scattershot at best. You can see what's going on here. That, well, there's still Pride Month, but I guess the Pride parades were canceled last year, and they'll probably be canceled this year. There's International Bullying Day and all manner of alphabet people holidays. It's probably about 2 months of the year, but it's not enough. People are talking about COVID. They're talking about vaccines. They're talking about masks and social distancing, but they're not talking about the alphabet people enough. Why aren't people talking about the gays and lesbians so much anymore? They're talking a lot about trans people. As for bisexuals, is that actually a thing? When Josie Nixon visited her health insurer's website seeking a coronavirus vaccine, she felt invisible. On a registration form that collected personal and demographic information, the 29-year-old Denver resident had to select other for her gender. There was no option for transgender woman. Days before, Nixon had felt a sense of hope when President Joe Biden announced the nomination of Dr. Rachel Levine, a transgender woman, to one of the nation's top health posts, and signed an executive order aimed at ameliorating COVID-19 health inequities in the country's most vulnerable communities. But her experience was a stark reminder, she said, that the nation's estimated 11.3 million alphabet people adults still have a long way to go toward reaching equity in healthcare and treatment in the United States. I don't know, maybe they could bring out special versions of the vaccines in rainbow colors. Would that help ameliorate their pain? Advocates and health experts are concerned that Nixon, like millions more in this population, will be unseen in a vaccine rollout for which data has revealed searing inequities across racial and socioeconomic lines. Communities of color and other marginalized groups have faced some of the most severe coronavirus outcomes, yet have received a smaller share of vaccines. Oh, yeah, here we go again. The younger you go in the American population, the more non-white it is. So giving vaccines to old people, that is to say the people who actually die from COVID-19, is racist. The collection of this data would increase the visibility of vaccine disparities, advocates say, and allow policymakers and healthcare providers to more nimbly and equitably. Wow, they are just overdosing on this word equity and its variants, are they not? Equitably allocate resources and craft messaging campaigns for members of these groups. Yeah, I don't know. Apparently, Krispy Kreme has been giving free treats, free deep fried treats to people who get vaccines. Maybe similar offers could be made to the alphabet people. You know, sex toys, lube, that sort of stuff. Maybe that would draw them in. Is there any evidence that's been presented in this story that somehow alphabet people are not getting vaccines? Let's see. Oh, yes, alphabet people have routinely experienced health disparities and often mistrust the healthcare system. Yes, I would guess that their use of the healthcare system is pretty extensive for all sorts of reasons. A result in part of a history of medical mistreatment. Oh, yes, American Psychiatric Association, 1987, blah, blah, blah. Today, many in this population continue to be turned away by doctors for emergency, pediatric, and other forms of medical care. Sure they are. Sure they are. In some states, such as Arkansas, doctors will be able to legally withhold medically necessary treatment for alphabet people patients. Could you give us a little detail on that? A 2020 study shows that transgender people frequently experience overt discrimination by healthcare providers, from being denied care to being verbally harassed. And care seekers who were out to their providers were more than 5 times more likely to experience overt discrimination. Those in intersectional vulnerable groups, such as Black or low-income alphabet people, may have even more medical distrust. You have a system where people are trying to access care and not receiving it, or not receiving treatment at the rate in which their white counterparts are receiving it, which I talked about above. So naturally, you're not going to trust that system, says Bisola Ojakutu, an infectious disease physician and professor of social medicine at Harvard University. Being part of 2 marginalized groups results in marginalization that's more than the sum of those 2 parts. Ooh, synergy. It's a compounded vulnerability. The pandemic may also be exacerbating some of these barriers. Trans Lifeline, a crisis hotline, said that calls from people unable to access care have more than doubled since before the pandemic. Oh, I see. It's only alphabet people. It's not, say, white people who think that they're having a heart attack, who haven't been able to access care, or symptoms of cancer, or any of these other things. No, it's just the alphabet people. I don't know, the arrogance and self-centeredness, it beggars belief. But speaking of arrogance and self-centeredness, here's a story from Helen Buyinsky at RT. Michelle Obama has proved one need not be born rich in order to see the lower classes and their potentially fatal diseases as tools for getting ahead, instructing 2 UK schools in the gospels of solipsism and sociopathy. The former First Lady digitally descended upon a pair of British girls' schools she had visited several times while in the White House, in order to pass on a flash of questionable wisdom that COVID-19 should be seen not as a destructive force or even as a trigger prompting leaders to destroy their own nations, but as a, quote, great blessing, unquote. She shared the disturbingly insensitive doctrine as part of a virtual tour, hawking copies of her biography, Becoming, recently published in a Young Reader edition. The COVID-19 panic and its economic fallout were not a tragedy, but a character-building opportunity. Obama explained, insisting the outbreak provided a chance for young people to push through something hard and uncomfortable and unpredictable. Yee. No matter how high you get or how smart you are or how successful, life will throw you things that you're not necessarily prepared for. Such wisdom. And if you know how to get yourself through it, you will succeed, Obama said, as if filling out blanks in some sort of plug-and-play motivational Mad Lib. Think outside the blank. Sticks and blank may break our bones, but words will never blank me. In addition to pushing the dumbed-down version of her 2018 book, Obama filled her young charges' heads with motivational tripe centering on career motivation, leadership skills, and mentorship, three attributes that have vanishingly little to do with whether one survives a pandemic or not, and indeed are of questionable utility at all in 2021, given the dearth of jobs to be found on either side of the Atlantic. But then Michelle Obama has never seemed to notice or care about the concerns of normal people, individuals who had plenty of problems before COVID-19 showed up and didn't need to add more blessings to their arsenal. Michelle hasn't had to care about such ephemeral concerns as jobs for a long time, and despite her solidly middle-class upbringing, her psychology is more Machiavelli than Dale Carnegie. The Kindle snippet of the new version of Becoming on Amazon.com ends with a chilling window into the future FLOTUS's childhood, as Obama describes how she preferred to play with her dolls and borrow her brother's without asking. A typical childhood play activity takes on an alarming tinge in the mind of the budding megalomaniac. Quote, "The point was that the dolls and the blocks needed me to give them life, and I dutifully gave it to them, imposing one personal crisis after another." I have no idea what that sentence means. It sounds like something a crazy person would say. And, more good news. Epidemiologists are getting out of the house. Now, where would this story be from? The New York Times, of course. It took 3 people to write this: Margot Sanger-Katz, Claire Kane-Miller, and Kevin Quealy. With hugs and haircuts, U.S. epidemiologists start returning carefully, and there's an exclamation point there, to everyday life. Vaccinations mean the pandemic is moving to a phase when behavior will depend on people's individual tolerance for risk. That has always been the case. Epidemiologists are starting to hug again. They're also running errands, gathering outdoors with friends, and getting haircuts in far greater numbers than before. And there's a poll here, Share saying they had done or would have done the following activities if necessary in the last 30 days, compared with answers in December 2020. Ran errands in person, 92%. Brought in mail without precautions. What? To go out into your front porch? Or unlock that little door? Apparently almost none of these epidemiologists were running errands in person in December 2020. And attended a sporting event, concert or play, 6%. Visited an older relative or friend in his or her home, 35%. In a new informal survey this month by the New York Times, 723 epidemiologists in the United States responded to questions about their life now and how they are navigating this in-between phase of the pandemic, when vaccines have become widespread and cases are declining nationally, but herd immunity is not assured and COVID-19 remains a threat. "Vaccines have given me freedom," said Diane Newmark Steiner, who heads the epidemiology division at the University of Minnesota. "I was very strict all year, but I'm now returning slowly to life." What was making them most comfortable, they said, was vaccines. "I am feeling very hopeful about the prospect of COVID-19 being controlled as a result of public uptake of vaccination," said Lindsay Ferrero, an epidemiology graduate student at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. "I balance my risks very carefully with benefits," says Luther King Fasahun, a doctor in epidemiology PhD student at Temple University. I have my master's level health economics training to thank for this. Some benefits are almost always worth it. There is a strong likelihood that we will experience unexpected problems due to moving about, as if the COVID pandemic was no longer a threat, said Jana Mossy, an epidemiologist who retired from Drexel University. The one book Stacey Abrams would require the president to read. Oh, do I really want to look into that? Apparently, Stacey Abrams has a new romance, a bodice ripper published, where Gayle King apparently insulted all the black women of the United States. She's a black woman herself, of course, by asking her about dating. Was she dating someone? What was her dating prospects? Well, I suppose if you write bodice rippers, one should expect that kind of question. Oh, Molly Jong Fast, concerned trolling. Trump's Republican Party continues to cover itself in glory. Decline is the mantra of today's Republican Party. Yeah, too funny. This story is from the New York Times as well? Is this New York Times Day? Anyway, let's say MSN News. No, it's from the Boston Globe. The next time the world faces an outbreak of a fast-spreading and deadly new pathogen, governments must act swiftly and be ready to restrict travel or mandate masks, even before anyone knows the extent of the threat, according to a pair of new reports delivered to the World Health Organization. Well, then they could simply make up diseases, and then we'd all be forced to wear masks again if they're going to mandate masks even before anyone knows the extent of the threat. These studies are intended to address missteps over the past year that led to more than 3.25 million deaths, some $10 trillion in economic losses, and more than 100 million people pushed into extreme poverty. Current institutions, public and private, fail to protect people from a devastating pandemic, concluded one of the reports released Wednesday, which called the COVID-19 pandemic the 21st century's Chernobyl moment. 70 people died at Chernobyl. 70 people. And that was after an explosion in a nuclear reactor and a fire, which is the worst thing that can happen, but only 70 people died. Pandemics, the authors concluded, are an existential threat on the order of a chemical or nuclear weapon, and preparing for them must be the responsibility of the highest levels of political leadership, rather than only health departments, often among the least powerful of government agencies. Health departments are often among the least powerful of government agencies. And the Boston Globe actually writes this after a whole year of latrine wallahs saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other thing, or else everybody will die. WHO is underpowered and underfunded by its member states. Helen Clark, a former Prime Minister of New Zealand, a very noxious woman, and an author of one of the reports, said at a media conference this week. Well, you can see what's happening here is the latrine wallahs are saying we're in charge now forever. There is no escape from our tyranny because everybody could die. This is from Kylie Zempel at The Federalist. Anthony Fauci, leading leftists, and their malicious band of media mouthpieces have all been sticking their fingers in the dike of the lockdown strategy. But as the data blows holes in the idea of lockdown inerrancy and the science gushes out, the ruling class is getting swept up in the current of their own failures, flailing at their opponents in a desperate attempt to divert blame. For more than a year, proponents and opponents of COVID-19 lockdowns have played tug-of-war over safety and freedom, with both camps declaring fealty to science despite opposite messages. Thanks to the ruling class, who insisted shutting down would save lives, that became the conventional wisdom. Fauci, President Biden, and their allies in the media called for nationwide lockdowns, with Biden condemning Trump for leaving the decision to states, and Fauci saying this time last year, I don't understand why, a nationwide stay-at-home order isn't happening. As is so often the case, however, the conventional wisdom was wrong. A new study from Chicago University economist Casey Mulligan validates what the anti-lockdowners knew all along. Lockdowns are a bad idea. After workplaces implemented mitigation measures, they became far safer environments than people's homes. Available data from schools, hospitals, nursing homes, food processing plants, hairstylists, and airlines show employers adopting mitigation protocols in the spring of 2020, Mulligan wrote. Such protocols included masking, reasonable social distancing, screening, and improving airflow, steps people wouldn't take in their own homes. Coincident with the adoption, infection rates in workplaces typically drop from well above household rates to well below. The data has gone out the window with all the other unsavory data, like the number of students cheated out of a full year of education and what that means for the future of our workforce, or the almost 100,000 businesses that permanently shut their doors. Lockdown proponents don't like to talk about the fact that their policies resulted in the United States losing 3.5% of its GDP in 2020 without saving the more than 580,000 people whose deaths were attributed to the virus, plus untold lives lost to despair and a lack of access to preventative care. And what do we have to show for the $2.6 trillion in taxpayer cash lawmakers threw at the problem without a moment of introspection? Yes, consider that. But government inputs count in the calculation of GDP. And U.S. GDP fell 3.5% in 2020, despite the trillions of dollars thrown about by Congress and state governments. For instance, while the media lauded Governor Andrew Cuomo as a pandemic hero while he locked down New York in order to covet patients to be housed in nursing homes alongside the pandemic's most vulnerable, the same media excoriated leading scientists such as Dr. Sunitra Gupta, who opposed anti-science lockdowns while advocating for special measures to protect the elderly. It's safe to say the approach of the Oxford University professor and leading infectious disease epidemiologist would have been superior to that of the scandal-ridden governor, but Gupta's detractors have blamed her for deaths that her guidance likely would have prevented. In The Guardian in January, Neil O'Brien, a Tory member of the British Parliament, smeared Gupta and other anti-lockdowners for their, quote, fantasies and, quote, tall tales, saying they, quote, make stuff up and, quote, have a hell of a lot to answer for. In the same pages, George Monbiot called Gupta a pundit and says she, quote, makes misleading claims about the pandemic. She mentions the Great Barrington Declaration, but Dr. Fauci, the highest paid federal employee, who has been the biggest disgrace of the pandemic, second only to communist China, said the declaration was total nonsense and very dangerous. The media called it the epitome of arrogance and reckless, implying that the Centers for Disease Control's opposite approach of sweeping and invasive restrictions relied on intellectual humility, despite the latter assuming elites knew better than most Americans what would be best for each of them. The Director General of the World Health Organization, who is also a shill for the murderous Chinese Communist Party, called the idea unethical. A new study released last month of the effects of lockdown in 10 countries was damning. Not only did researchers find that mandatory stay-at-home and business closures resulted in no clear, significant beneficial effect on case growth in any country, but in some cases, lockdowns were actually pro-contagion. Oh, speaking of the WHO, this is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. An independent panel has ruled that the World Health Organization, which in January 2020 suggested it was racist to impose border controls to stop the spread of COVID-19, could have saved over 3 million lives if it had recommended travel restrictions earlier. The panel has released a report entitled COVID-19 Make It the Last Pandemic, which concludes that the month of February was lost because most countries failed to stop the international flow of people coming from heavily infected regions. The situation we find ourselves in today could have been prevented, said panel co-chair Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Was she former the Prime Minister of Liberia? Adding, it is due to a myriad of failures, gaps, and delays in preparedness and response. The report notes that Chinese doctors reported cases of unusual pneumonia in December 2019, and yet on January 14th, the WHO amplified Chinese state propaganda that there was no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the virus. According to the experts, the WHO should have declared an international health emergency during their first meeting on January 22nd and imposed travel restrictions. In late January 2020, despite declaring a global health emergency, the WHO released a statement explicitly advising against any travel or trade restriction based on the current information available. Countries are cautioned against actions that promote stigma or discrimination in line with the principles of Article 3 of the IHR, said the WHO. In other words, Watson comments, because of the feelings of Chinese people may have been hurt, the WHO told people not to impose border controls, despite evidence now proving that such measures stop the spread of COVID-19 more effectively than the lockdowns. As we also highlighted at the time, numerous politicians in America suggested throughout February that it was bigoted to advise against mass gatherings at Chinese New Year festivals in major cities. In Europe, authorities were even encouraging people to hug Chinese people as late as March under the guise of virtue signaling anti-racism campaigns. In October last year, the New York Times reported that the WHO's decision not to advise early border closures was based on politics, not science. Politics, not science. That is a very strong statement indeed. We know that the regime experts are they're modest people who work only for good. You know, like Dr. Fauci, who must not be disrespected. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Following another confrontation between Senator Rand Paul and White House medical advisor Anthony Fauci Tuesday, during which Paul questioned Fauci about his extensive ties to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, CNN's Anderson Cooper declared that Paul should have more respect, at least for medical science. Rand Paul is actually a doctor. Yes. And Anderson Cooper is not. Reporting on the exchange, the CNN host proclaimed Paul is an ophthalmologist. You think he would have at least more respect for medical science. It's unclear how asking valid questions about Fauci and the National Institute of Health's funding of the Wuhan lab, where dangerous experiments on bat coronaviruses were being conducted, represents a disrespect for science. Cooper later repeated Fauci's claim that Paul and other GOP senators are playing to the cameras. Anderson Cooper accusing others of playing to the cameras. The idea that Fauci is somehow a villain to Trump-allied politicians, what does one even say to that idea? I don't know, the truth, perhaps? Cooper also stated, we should also point out that Dr. Fauci, in his exchange with Senator Paul, did stress that he fully supports further investigation into the origins of COVID-19. Commenting on the latest exchange, Paul himself stressed that Fauci was being dishonest. In fact, one of the main papers published by Dr. Shi, the bat lady, as they call her, in the Wuhan Institute, says in the byline, funded by the NIH and funded specifically by the NIAI, which is AID, which is Fauci's group, Paul said. So no, he completely dissembled on that. He's leading you on to believe something that's not true. Could it be possible, do you think, people, that we might see some sort of bursting out, falling apart here? There seem to be many things coming together at the same time, which are not good for the regime, such as this one. Several provinces join Ontario in pausing use of AstraZeneca vaccine. But it's perfectly safe and perfectly efficacious. So why would there be pauses? Mixing COVID-19 vaccine doses leads to more reactions, study finds from the CBC. Oh dear. As some provinces halt the use of AstraZeneca, Canada confirms 655,000 more doses will arrive next week. And Prime Minister Trudeau says he plans to take second AstraZeneca shot if available. Yes, I wonder about that. Anyone can have a jab in the arm. What they're getting, well, that's private, isn't it? Alberta Justice Minister apologizes after accusing Feds provincial NDP media of wanting COVID-19 disaster. We have another example of a politician browbeaten for speaking the truth. The media, to name just one, and let's say the Alberta NDP has been saying that Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, is personally responsible for 2,200 deaths. Again, presumably because he didn't unlock the door in his office that said magic wand and waved it and would stop people, average age 81, of dying of a respiratory disease, because that is well within the remit and powers of any government. And we have a complaint here. Ontario doctors dispute nurses' claims about pandemic pay. This is from Emma Paling of CBC. Pay rights cited by nurses applies only when physicians are working as doctors, not when supporting nurses, according to the Ontario Medical Association. DP Saharan, an intensive care unit nurse in the Toronto area who cares for COVID-19 patients, says nurses have not been compensated fairly for the work they've been doing in the pandemic. Her recent post on Instagram, because of course, in which she said nurses were unappreciated and disrespected, received support from thousands of people. I thought they were doing this from the goodness of their hearts because, they're noble frontline workers in the battle against COVID-19. Nurses previously told CBC News that doctors were earning as much as $450 an hour in ICUs while working to support nurses being paid $33 to $48 an hour. The Ontario Medical Association says those rates are what the Ministry of Health agreed to pay doctors at hospitals experiencing COVID-19 surges in 2020, but they only make those rates while working as physicians. So, lesson from COVID-19, nurses need more money. Let's have a return to the chat here. It's time for the adults to take charge, says Don Willis. Something, Gameston says public health has learned to grift from the teachers' union. Okay. What is this? Staten? Hamas is a Palestinian Sunni Islamic fundamentalist but pragmatic, cough, cough, militant and nationalist organization. Yeah, well, I haven't spoken about the latest battle between Israel and the Palestinians. I've simply noticed that America is now becoming, increasingly a battleground between, are you on the Israeli side or are you on the Palestinian side? It's not a particularly important issue to America. I'm not on the Palestinian side for what it's worth. It strikes me as sentimental liberalism. But we have Ilhan Omar and Rashid, what's her name, in Detroit, screeching about apartheid. And there are others. We have, Palestinians attacking Jews on the streets of New York over this. I once asked Professor Paul Gottfried when organized Jewry in the United States would stop promoting the fatuous and dangerous policy of importing as many Muslims as possible to the United States, and he told me never. And he's probably right about that. Buddy says, Kevin, have you ever witnessed a natural triple play in real time? I don't know. I mean, one sees so many highlights. I have seen Stealing Home in natural real time. I've seen that happen twice. GC Style says it's nice that the Canadian general public has an endless supply of money for the public sector. No. A good comment here from David Dorian. I'm not on either side. Just remember, diversity is what makes the Middle East so peaceful. I don't think it's an accident that these attacks by Hamas have happened during Joe Biden's administration, because the Biden administration made it very clear after the election that in their belief that the Trump administration had been too pro-Israel and that Biden was going to work to balance it out. What else do we have here? Serpent from King of the Hill is our lives now. Maybe it was a nuclear Fukushima, biological Fukushima. This is methadone for suburban, affluent white female liberals who never lost their email jobs. Doctors don't like transgenders and low-income people either. Can I ever catch a break, says Texas feral hog. Don Willis says, never apologize for being white, never apologize for being male. Well, here, never apologize for being straight. There's all sorts of reasons. Oh, Yo Mama refers to cultural drugs, dispatches from Piss Earth. I'm quite taken by this book, I must say, which I'm going to be talking about on Friday. And it's an issue because millions of Christians literally believe God will curse them for supporting Israel. It's very much a minority position in Christianity, actually. It's associated with a heresy from the 19th century. What are they? Premillennialism? Dispensational premillennialism. And, let's hear from Vice, which is essentially the primary media outlet of Antifa. Health conspiracy theorists hate living in the world that they helped create. Oh, I see. It was the health conspiracy theorists who decided to smash the economy and destroy society. Oh, our old friend Anna Merlin. Vaccine passports and talk of mandatory vaccinations have been boogeymen for health conspiracy theorists for decades, but they helped get us here. Oh, vaccinations are not going to be mandatory except if you want to work in this job or except if you want to go places, and probably soon if certainly if you want to travel, but no, they're not mandatory. And vaccine passports, we're going to have vaccine passports, but they're not going to be mandatory. Oh, I see. So it's like a merit badge or something? No. I think that Anna Merlin is smart enough to figure out what is going on. Anyone who refuses to be injected with experimental poisons will be prohibited from travel, education, and work. Larry Cook declared recently on a fringe social media site. Oh, you want to mention what that might be? Apparently not. No, this is not a synopsis for a new horror movie. This is our current reality. You see, how could anyone be talking about a horror movie when for 14 months now we've been told to stay at home? You're not supposed to go outside or you will die. Keep 6 feet or 2 meters away from everyone. And then, in the late summer, masks, mandatory masks on all transportation, in malls, in stores. No, nothing horrifying about that. Merlin tells us that, as usual, he was on a broad level wrong. People who refuse COVID-19 vaccines are not necessarily going to be prohibited from travel, education, and work. You like that? Not necessarily. Nor are those vaccines experimental poisons. But Cook was correct in one way. He and the other conspiracy theorist health freedom advocates, health freedom in scare quotes, because we shouldn't have health freedom. Anyone who talks about latrine Wallace telling us that we can't go to the park to watch the cherry trees bloom must be why would anyone care about that? Governments have always been telling people that. Anyway, these advocates are closer than they were before to living in a world they would find to be a nightmarish dystopia. You see what's happened here? The people who warned about the nightmarish dystopia are the people responsible for the nightmarish dystopia. It's always our fault. Oh, and this is from the BBC. The volunteers using honeypot groups to fight anti-vax propaganda. Honeypot groups. Are they throwing women at these people? Is that what is happening? Let's see. Richard is a builder, a trainee psychologist, and one half of the duo behind the Decoy Group. This is written by specialist disinformation reporter Mariana Spring. She meets the everyday citizens battling conspiracy theories in their spare time. Yeah, okay. A likely story. Richard's friends Dave believed in conspiracy theories for the best part of 20 years. If I was actually going to create a group saying I'm going to re-educate you, then I'm not going to get any takers. But I have to do it in a stealth way, which is a bit underhanded, I suppose, but the intentions are good. The problem, original research from BBC Monitoring has revealed how Facebook pages and groups promoting misleading and false claims about vaccines saw a significant rise in followers in several countries across the globe this past year. Well, as you heard me say just a few minutes ago, a bunch of Canadian provinces are stopping the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine after several countries have stopped using it. And we were told that anyone who raised questions about AstraZeneca's vaccine was a conspiracy theorist who was going to get people killed. There's no living with these people. They're shameless, and they will say and do anything. They will blame us for the disaster that they have wrought. And here's another piece from Vice by Shayla Love. People aren't addicted to wearing masks. They're traumatized. And who traumatized them? There's a glaring omission from the discussion about why some can't quit pandemic behaviors, the mental and emotional toll of the last year, and who's responsible for that. Around a month ago, Lauren Albanese went to the mall with her uncle and dad. It was the first time since the pandemic began that the 27-year-old from Staten Island had been around people outside her household. Shameful. As they entered, Albanese froze. All the people around her seemed to move in slow motion. Her dad spoke to her, but she couldn't hear his words. My body completely shut down, triggered by simply being around people. I still feel like I don't have control over myself and how my body reacts after everything that's happened. Albanese tested positive for COVID-19 3 days after her grandmother died on April 8, 2020. Not a day goes by when I don't think about the events that took place over a year ago. So over a year ago, she contracted COVID-19. She's still alive. Well, she's 27 years old. And then so she locked herself into her house for a year. And these are the reasonable people that we should be taking advice from, apparently. Let's go to lockdown skeptics. CDC finds more clotting cases after Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine. The CDC has said there is a plausible causal association between the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine and blood clotting after finding more U.S. cases of the condition among people who received the vaccine. Yeah, that was a conspiracy theory. We're publishing an original piece by Dr. Sinead Murphy, an associate researcher in philosophy at Newcastle University, about why it is the public have put up so little resistance to lockdown. She was prompted to wonder about this by recent pieces on why the Conservatives did so well in last week's election. From Freddie Sayer's piece in Unheard, attributing it to Stockholm Syndrome, to Noah Carl's piece in Lockdown Skeptics discussing status quo bias. Dr. Murphy thinks it is something more sinister and deeper than that. She writes, in an essay from 25 years ago on contemporary conditions of work, the Italian philosopher Paolo Virno identified the phenomenon of uprooting as increasingly operative in societies like his own. Not a once-off uprooting, such as moving from one job to another or career to another, but an unending process of uprooting. The effect of precarious employment and its continual auditing, in which workers must always be ready to move onwards or upwards and to cultivate the commensurate skills of adaptability and virtuosic sociability. Most pertinent in Virno's analysis is the alliance it indicated between this endless uprooting and a certain brand of gullibility. The erosion of stability gives rise to a hyperbolic and free-floating feeling of belonging, even though occasions for it are slight or implausible. The impossibility of securing ourselves with any durable context, Verno wrote, disproportionately increases our adherence to the most fragile instances of the here and now, to every present order, to all rules, to all games. Does the phenomenon of uprooting that Verno described apply to our situation now? Does it explain the curious adherence of many in our society to the present COVID order and to those who dictate it, no matter how fragile it and they have become? Dr. Murphy believes so. Of course, this is an issue of scale, and that in highly scaled societies, people are looking for reassurance from wherever, because all the traditional sources of reassurance have pretty much been obliterated. So we take reassurance from, a new season of The Handmaid's Tale and the like, because I know that a lot of people have found reassurance in that. Well, it appears that our people have come to love Big Brother. How long that will last for, I'm not really sure, because if you look at what's going on in the United States now, it seemed to me that our regimes had made a deal that, okay, everything that you thought that you knew, things about community and family and nationhood and the like, they're gone now. But there'll be all these diversions for you. Now, you can't afford to pay for them, but the banks will loan you the money at crippling interest rates so you can have them anyway. What if the banks soon can no longer loan us the money for these diversions, even at crippling interest rates? What kind of loyalty do we have to our countries when our leaders make it clear on every possible level that they hate us? Well, they hate some of us more than others, and the some of us that they hate more than others, they want us to hurry up and die. And they can't have made that any clearer. Pfizer and Moderna vaccines to be offered to under 40s from Thursday. This, of course, is in England and Wales. Boris Johnson tells the House of Commons that pandemic is currently at peak and the UK should expect a new surge in the autumn. So back to masks and social distancing and everything closed. The London Telegraph's global security correspondents claim no trade-off between lockdowns and the economy. Writing in the newspaper, the correspondents, whose coverage is partly funded by the, wait for it, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, write that the health versus economy trade-off is false because countries where the virus was swiftly contained, such as Vietnam, have seen less economic damage plus far fewer deaths. The claim, based on one country, fails to acknowledge that the entire Southeast Asian region, regardless of the measures taken, has had a much milder experience of COVID-19 than some other parts of the world, particularly Europe and the Americas. Furthermore, while it may be that Vietnam's early border closures produced better outcomes, there is some evidence of this, that bird has well and truly flown for most of the world. So the example of Vietnam is now irrelevant as far as this pandemic is concerned. Perhaps, though, they have a future pandemic in mind. In fact, the peer-reviewed evidence is that lockdowns have no impact on the epidemic death toll, although it's noting that Vietnam, which Nuki and Nui hold up as an example we should follow in future, has never imposed a full countrywide lockdown. It's also not clear how countries which close their borders to an endemic virus can ever hope to open them again, a problem Vietnam is currently experiencing. Vietnam is also not exactly an international global hub. Vaccine refusal higher among health workers who feel pressured by employers, according to new research. How about that? Again, if these vaccines were also wonderful, one would think that they would sell themselves. Well, seeing as they're free, it's even better than that. No, you have to take it. You must, or else you're a bad person. You're going to be killing people. You're going to be wrecking society. There's nothing wrong with the virus. No. They're perfectly safe and efficacious. Golly, I wonder why that sort of talk makes people suspicious. Again, in England and Wales, ministers can't rule out the return of tiered lockdowns. Yes, they become addicted to their power, or to the power of the latrine wallas. And surprisingly, they're not in a mood to give it up. Yeah, it's rather like a war. We saw that in World War I. We saw that in World War II. The governments assumed vast new powers, supposed to be temporary, like income tax. Guess what? They became permanent. Someone called Forbes to now tweets, young Molly Jong Fast regularly nominates Alex Berenson as her F that guy, and I will applaud each time she does. Berenson's actions will lead to more disease and likely more death. He and Tucker Carlson together is a horrifying prospect for public health in America. So how come there wasn't an explosion in deaths in Texas and Florida when they completely dismantled all lockdown measures? Why didn't that happen then? Well, they don't have any answer to that, do they? To those of you who pay attention to what music critics say, are there still such thing as music critics? They're not really taken very seriously anymore, unlike the past. Van Morrison was a kind of god. I suppose particularly the recordings he made in the 60s and 70s, but some after that. But it turns out he's a lockdown skeptic, which means that he's a washed up drunk and a lunatic. He's a lunatic and a very bad man. I've seen literally dozens of reviews of his new album, and they all say the same thing. He's a lunatic and a very bad man. This is from the Los Angeles Times. Ryan Walsh, what happened to Van Morrison? The fall from eccentric genius to conspiracy theorist. Wouldn't you think that eccentric genius kind of implies that one might be susceptible to conspiracy theories? But no, conspiracy theory has now become what the argument from authority, or even worse, that's a conspiracy theory. Oh, so we're not going to discuss it. No, we're not going to discuss it. Why aren't we going to discuss it? Because it's a conspiracy theory. In other words, you're just dismissing it out of hand. Yes, we are dismissing it out of hand, and you had better not keep up with that, or we'll call you a Jew hater, as they have called Van Morrison, who was complaining about media concentration, which is all too real. And a lot of these journalists know that it's all too real, because with each new round of media consolidation, hundreds or thousands of them lose their jobs. And then they go on to Twitter to whine about it, how they are not properly appreciated. To Alex Berenson, the CDC, the FDA, and General Dynamics appear to be adding Johnson & Johnson side effects reports into the VAERS database as quickly as possible, while delaying the publication of reports about Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Those are the mRNA vaccines. In other words, the proof is in the data. The Nuremberg, oh yes, one community quoted the Nuremberg Code of 1947. Remember that? We were going to decide, we were going to pass a law. So once and for all, nothing like the Nazi horrors could happen. Permissible medical experiments. 1, the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have the legal capacity to give consent, should be situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matters involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This latter element requires that before the acceptance of an affirmative decision by the experimental subject, there should be made known to him the nature, duration, and purpose of the experiment, the method and means by which it is to be conducted, all inconveniences and hazards reasonably to be expected, and the effects upon his health or person which may possibly come from his participation in the experiment. Governor Mike DeWine had tweeted 2 weeks from tonight, on May the 26th, we will announce a winner of a separate drawing for adults who have received at least their first dose of the vaccine. This announcement will occur each Wednesday for 5 weeks, and the winner each Wednesday will receive $1 million. Berenson comments, oh my God, if this is not illegal, it should be. It is certainly unethical, doubly so because the vaccines have not received full approval. They will probably say that the per-person value of the lottery is under $100, and if people already get that much to be vaccinated, which is troubling by itself, but nobody is going to do that math. This is life-changing money for the winners and thus deeply coercive. California governor says mask mandate to end after June 15th. Berenson comments, February, March 2020, you don't need a mask. April, December 2020, you will die without a mask. January, February 2021, no 2 masks. March 2021 to June 15th, 2021, maybe 1 mask is okay. June 15th, 2021 to you don't need a mask. It's science. See? And he had noted the apparent sexual interest of Molly Jong-Fast in him and said, well, sorry, Molly, I am taken. And let's go back to the chat. I don't know, I'm feeling more positive, more optimistic about this. That, as I say, many things are happening at the same time, suggesting that a collapse of confidence in the various regimes. And, you know, the same people who, oh yes, must wear a mask, must get vaccinated, the people who are addicted to mimetic behavior. Well, you know, if there's a sea change, then there's a different kind of mimetic behavior, and often anger. I was sold a bill of goods. That might be happening. Jim Smith writes, Joel Stein settled the media issue in an LA Times column in 2008, in which he expressed pride at the Jewish dominance. We've seen that before. A famous book, Hollywood, the World That the Jews Made. I'm trying to think, he uses an initial in his name, J something or other. There's all manner of books. Ben Stein has said the same thing. Celebrated a Jewish writer, actor, commercial pitchman. He said the Jews run Hollywood and they should be proud of it. I don't really think that this is controversial, you know. Van Morrison now has free publicity thanks to the foreword. This is damaging and dangerous. Every time someone says, you know, there's bad people out there doing bad things, and Jewish interests say he's actually talking about the Jews, this does not help the Jews. Aside from the demonstration of paranoia, it just suggests a guilty conscience. And what conspiracy? It's all out in the open, says Aslan. Well, yes. GC Style says, after critics raved about Fiona Apple's last album, giving it a 10 out of 10, I stopped reading. I don't suppose I really kept up with Fiona Apple. I liked her first album very, very much. I thought it was brilliant. But the pressure of the fame seems to have crushed her, and it was very sad to watch. That she was such a beautiful woman, and then she became so hesitant and frazzled, and one feared what one would read about her. Okay, where are we moving on to? What is this? 40 for Halton region of Ontario today as well. You're still getting the jab in June or later. KMG talking Gaza yet? No, not really. As I say, I'm just disturbed. You know, this has become, it's become a domestic political issue in both the United States and in Canada. And I don't think it should be a domestic political issue. You know, the Israelis are eventually going to strike back in a big way. I mean, I think they have to. That's been their policy. And then there's complaints of the use of the word disproportionate. Well, if you kill 50 or 100 people for every one of your people that have been killed, that is by dictionary definition disproportionate. And frankly, I don't think that is anything wrong with it. If you're trying to send a message, stop doing this now, because it is not worth it for you. You will be hurt far more than we will be. But again, disproportionate, it has a dictionary meaning. I think that people know what it means. And then we're told that, the use of the word disproportionate is now an anti-Semitic dog whistle. In more American tragedy news, the Ellen DeGeneres show is ending after 19 seasons. Did she fall or was she pushed? A little bit of both, it seems. Yes, the New York Post confirms the rumor, and this comes after more than 3,000 episodes and a flurry of toxic workplace allegations. The beloved turned beleaguered talk show host is calling it quits amid the claims of unkind behavior and bullying, as well as reports of a significant dip in sponsors and ratings. This is a strange story. I suppose it's a typical story of its time, of our time, because Ellen DeGeneres is an example of manufactured consent. Oh, yes, she's America's favorite lesbian. Everyone loves Ellen. Why? Why does everyone love Ellen? Is it because she's such a outstanding interviewer? Is it because she's so attractive, personally or personality wise? Can she sing? Can she dance? Can she balance a little red ball on her nose? No, she can't do any of those things. Apparently, there was yelling and such like going on, untoward behavior on the set of her TV show. Who would have thunk it? I worked in show business for some years, and it's a high-pressure environment, and there's often a lot of yelling going on, and often a lot of bullying going on. And if you really can't abide that kind of behavior, you should definitely stay out of show business. But okay, so toxic behavior. It would appear that Ellen DeGeneres' downfall began because she was seen to be, or it was claimed, that she was insufficiently groveling to a trans person. I am not making this up. This is from page 6, which is the gossip column of the New York Post from August the 6th, 2020. And if you want to know how powerful trans people have become, apparently they can take America's favorite lesbian and knock her out of the box. YouTube vlogger Nikki DeJagger, who is a person that no one had ever heard of, dished on her awful experience when she was a guest on the Ellen DeGeneres show in January. DeJagger, 26, was invited onto DeGeneres' show after coming out as transgender, but she didn't get the warm welcome she expected from the talk show host. Maybe I'm being naive, but I expected them to welcome me with confetti. Welcome to the Ellen DeGeneres show, she said in an April interview with Dutch magazine and C. But instead, I got greeted by an angry intern who was a bit overworked. I expected a Disney show, but I got a Teletubbies After Dark. She then claimed that she wasn't treated the same as VIP guests and wasn't given access to a bathroom while backstage. Every guest at Ellen had a private toilet, but I didn't. I couldn't even use the closest toilet to me because it was reserved for the Jonas Brothers. Yes, and of course, all of these things really happened. DeJagger later insinuated that DeGeneres was cold and distant with her. It's really nice that you came over and said hello to me. She didn't, DeJagger said in a Dutch talk show following her Ellen appearance. Okay. There are some talk show hosts who greet guests in the green room in the dressing rooms, whatever, and there's some who don't. I've read that Jay Leno was very much appreciated by young people, comedians making their first appearance on The Tonight Show because they were very nervous. And Jay would come and greet them and say, hey, everything's going to be great. We're going to have a good time. There are lots of talk show hosts who don't do this for the reasons that the time before, just before these shows start, is a very tense period. And also a lot of talk show hosts like the idea of going in fresh and, not having conversations before the actual interview. But apparently, Ellen DeGeneres was not nice enough to some trans vlogger that no one had ever heard of, and that initiated her downfall. I talked about manufactured consent. I knew of Ellen DeGeneres before she came out. She was a stand-up comedian. She was kind of, really bland. She also worked as an actress and was really bland. And she had some TV shows and she was really bland. And so, yes, it was teased that she was going to come out, and this dragged out for the longest time. And then she became America's favorite lesbian, and she was signed as a cover girl model. This did not sit well with me because for decades, cover girl models were the flower of America, young women. And Ellen DeGeneres, whatever her other qualities might be, is not model material. If you look at the hilarious photographs, the actual photographs of her selling CoverGirl cosmetics, she looks like a vampire raccoon. And then they hired Queen Latifah as a CoverGirl model, which led me to ask, how much makeup do lesbians buy? So, on the one hand, I'm not heartbroken that Ellen and her painful dancing on stage, even more painful when it's, Barack Obama. Apparently not all black men have a sense of rhythm. But so we know who's at the top of the intersectional totem pole, and it is not lesbians. As I learned from Abigail Schreier's book, which I highly recommend to you, that lesbianism is seen by young women now as a joke, a porn category. This is from the Mail. Heidi Parker. Dawson's Creek's vet Busy Phillips reveals her child Birdie, 12, is femme-presenting non-binary after sharing they came out as gay at age 10. Oh, when she was in the 4th grade, came out as gay. That she knew all about what that possibly meant. So now she's a femme-presenting non-binary, which is that just like a code for seeking attention? Is it? Because it seems like it. Non-binary, but femme-presenting. That is to say, very feminine. And Busy Phillips has 2 children, Birdie and Cricket. And of course, giving your children names like that is in no way going to damage them. Now, I'm sure there's lots of young girls or women who are nicknamed Birdie or Cricket, but that's not their real name. That's not the name that appears on their paycheck or on government records or on their driver's license. Of course, Busy Phillips is a very talented woman who is known, among other things, for her abortion advocacy, where she revealed that she was raped at the age of 15. And she had an abortion, which she's very proud of. And she didn't realize it was a rape until, 10 or 20 years later? Oh, okay. It was that kind of rape. Was it? And what am I going to talk about now? I'm going to talk about Philip Roth. Not Philip Roth directly, but a heralded biography of the celebrated American novelist, which has come out. by Blake Bailey, and there were accusations made against this man. And so the publisher withdrew the book. They canceled the book after it had already been published, and his literary agency fired him. This is a typical Me Too story in that it seems, bogus, actually. I was groomed from the age of 12 by my high school English teacher, Nabokov's novel Lolita. Oh dear, your high school English teacher was having sex with you when you were 12? No, the sex happened a decade later. Oh, I'm a little confused now. And there's a long story in Slate by Eve Crawford Payton, who claims to be one of Blake Bailey's victims. And of course, one cannot get enough humiliation these days. This woman has publicly humiliated herself. I suppose she thinks that this is empowering. I will note that, Steve Saylor said, talking about the subject, that he was glad that he'd managed to snag a copy of this biography before, I don't know, all the copies were pulped. And again, physical media. Get it while you still can. But I was drawn to an especially strange piece by Rebecca Traister, professional feminist, that appeared in The Cut, which is part of New York Magazine, April the 30th, Life as a Man. And this word, objectification, appears again and again. 4 times in it. Objects, yes. Objectification. As the Times critic, Parul Segal, pointed out in her review, Bailey has told the story of how he got the job of writing the biography of Philip Roth by bonding with him over a shared objectification of the actress Ally McGraw. Objectification is a word that feminists and their allies use constantly, obsessively. Why? We are not pure spirits. We have bodies. We are corporeal. We are all objects. All people are objectified. Oh, let's see, babies are objectified. Most people believe babies to be cute and lovable. People are objectified on the basis of their sex. They're objectified on the basis of their race. They're objectified on the basis of various physical characteristics. Let's see, people considered ugly are certainly objectified, and people considered good looking are certainly objectified. Men who are short, who are objectified. People who suffer from various physical maladies or disabilities are objectified. This is the way of nature. She uses this term sex object, which I find absolutely hilarious. I don't think she quite understands human reproduction. In order for the continuation of the species to continue occurring, sexual intercourse must take place. That is to say that a man must regard a woman as a sexual object, because if he did not, he would not have sexual intercourse with her, and thus there would be no procreation, and the human race would die out. As it turns out, women spend an enormous amount of money and time objectifying themselves sexually through makeup, hair products, other body products, through physical fitness, through their clothes, through their accessories. And surely Rebecca Traister is aware of this. But she seems to demonstrate an absolute hatred of men, of the very idea of maleness, let alone masculinity. She is actually married to someone, a public defender, an Iranian fellow who she married a few years ago. And I've never met the fellow, but I feel sorry for him. She is an ugly person from without and an ugly person from within. And do I really want people who hate men that much to be considered experts on them? But that's the world we live in. I came across this story from a couple of years ago from the London Review of Books by someone called Patricia Lockwood, and it's a me story. 6,767 words on John Updike, a volume of the Library of America collation of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 novels by him. I was hired as an assassin, she begins. You don't bring in a 37-year-old woman to review John Updike in the year of our Lord 2019 unless you're hoping to see blood on the ceiling. It's John Updike, old white man, dead now. Boo! And she's admitting it. She's absolutely omitting it. But this was the funniest part of her review. A better question about John Updike might be why nothing sticks to him. A friend pointed out that he once wrote a book called Not Cancelled Yet. Of course he did. He has a book called Everything. He is remembered as a libertine when he might be remembered as a reactionary conservative or even as a Christian. And the libertines of literature have a habit of being allowed everything. Colm Toibin, who is an Irish author, in a 2009 interview with Bookslut, expressed a belief that Updike's homophobia would eventually eat into his critical reputation. Yes, I'm sure it will. I'm sure it already has. But who gives a toss? Certain people like certain people other than other certain people. Dostoevsky hated Catholics, of which I am one. I hated them with a passion. And he hated Poland with a passion, and Poland is dear to me. But oh no, I can't read or enjoy Dostoevsky because he doesn't agree with me about every single group of people. I see that this Toybin fellow is an alphabet person. Can't like John Updike because apparently he expressed some hesitancy about AIDS, a little bit of uncomfortableness being around people with AIDS. Shocking, I know. Shocking, I know. But there you have it. Why do universities exist? This is a serious question I'm asking. It's not really good enough to say that they exist because they've always existed, because they haven't always existed. Oxford and Paris were the two first, if you will, modern universities, although they were founded in the Middle Ages. And why were they founded? They were founded to train priests. Oxford and Cambridge were founded to train priests. Harvard University was founded to train priests. Universities do not train priests anymore, for the most part. They are what Clark Kerr, the former head of the University of California system, they're now multiversities. He said this, 60 years ago. They do everything for everybody at enormous cost. Is that really such a good idea? Is that really a positive good to us? William Briggs writes today, the purposes of a university are to pass on knowledge and to provide a refuge in which to conduct scholarship. That's it and nothing more. Nowadays, scholarship is called research, the former word sounding staid and unfruitful. The problem is the latter word is boisterous and is only too fruitful. More and more research is produced, the pace always increasing. Unread journals warehousing this research litters libraries. Much research is harmful, and the expected pace of it guarantees that a lot of it will be false. Worth is judged by quantity over quality because money. Knowledge is, we need to remind ourselves, our perception of true things. You can go to a TV station or corporate seminar and have propaganda passed on to you, or to any studies course, or any college course that has become woke or infatuated with research. Propaganda is a mixture of truths, exaggerations, and purposeful lies of commission and omission. Knowledge is also that which relates to our lives of the mind. Practical truths, like how to use a spoke shave or dig a well or design an internal combustion engine, are surely forms of knowledge, but one should not go to university to study these. He's absolutely right about this. Nursing, commerce, all of these things are not properly in the university sphere, but everything is now because they're multiversities. Briggs continues, one becomes or should become an apprentice because these are all truths having to do with actions of the body. Actions of the mind is scholarship. Students are also or should be apprentices, but working for a different end. This restriction to passing on knowledge to bolster lives on the mind is why university should be an undertaking only for a few, only those able to endure scholarship. Right now, about 2 out of 3 kids go to college. It should be 1 in 20 or 30, maybe fewer. If one's goal is only research or to learn some other practice skill, universities are not needed and indeed cause active harm. How much benefit over harm depends on how steeped in politics the subject is and how much distraction from the skill is mandated. Most kids go to university to earn a degree, a certification showing that they are worthy for work, the skills of which they will learn, not at a university, but at the job. In other words, university is a filter for certain apprenticeships. What a needless waste of time and resources. I should point out that Briggs has a PhD himself. But those employers who require a degree are somewhat restrained because of the need for diversity quotas and to prove they are not discriminating, which of course they are, because otherwise they would not require the degree. Employers are thus working off the loose and increasingly looser correlation that the worst possible apprentices don't have degrees. As soon as all kids go to college, the correlation drops to 0. Employers would then, to get around diversity, have to up or change their requirement, perhaps on insisting on master's degrees. You see, of course, that to require a degree because diversity also ensures universities increase the ratio of propaganda to knowledge, and why corporations become woker and woker over time as their ranks are filled with the unable. It is a vicious negative feedback, which can only be ended by some tumult. One guy is saying, and I agree, but I think it unlikely, defund universities. Even progressives nostalgic for the old ways are saying this. It is the only thing that can save them. Strangely, the gentleman did not remark on the main purpose of the university, which is not to create new knowledge, but to pass on the old knowledge. The research bug bites us all. Anyway, we can't but agree with this. When academia's astonishing message to society is, we'll take your money, but we'll do with it what we want, not what you want, the response ought to be simple: no, you won't. It won't be, though. None of us are naive enough to think that we can stem the flow of money into STEM and to universities in general. Yes, the coming demographic crunch will slice the arteries of some institutions, but the remaining will continue in the same vein. Happening now, though this whiny person thinks universities are for jobs training, which is what high school was supposed to be. Our only hope is to create our own. I still like my network of independent scholars idea. I just mentioned one example, which I'm acquainted with personally. I happen to know that in the old days, before certification became all the rage, how one became a librarian. One worked at one got a job at a library, and one studied what librarians do and, perform various tasks. Then you would take a test, and if you passed the test, you became a librarian. This is how Philip Larkin became a librarian. Philip Larkin, the celebrated English poet and later head of the library at the University of Hull. John Brain, the English novelist, author of Room at the Top, was also a librarian, and he had no schooling in library studies, as they are called. He simply worked in a library and then passed a test. Then a Bachelor of Library Science was devised. Then beyond that, a Master's in Library Science. So you have to spend 4 years in North America getting your BA or BSc, and then another 2 years studying library science. Now, I worked at a university library for 12 years, as most of you know, and I had an opportunity to study librarians and to study their instructors. My favorite example of this is the fellow who taught the legendary course on cataloging books. And he would announce to his students at the beginning of the year, we're talking, September to May at the University of BC, that nothing that you learn in this class will teach you how to catalog a book. One would expect voices of protest, such as, then why the hell are we here? Is this a scam? I could teach any reasonably intelligent person how to catalog books, all manner of books, within a week. There are standard textbooks of subject headings and the like, and of numbers, classifications, and the Library of Congress system. And more to the point, almost any book that a library is going to get now has already been cataloged by the Library of Congress, or by the British National Library, or by the National Library of Canada, or by the Australian National Library, et al. It's not necessary, but to be a librarian, you need to get a master's degree. Okay, so I mentioned cataloging. The other parts, checking out books, well, the librarians don't do that part. The part of sitting at a desk and saying, oh, those books are there? This kind of books are there? Well, no, it's not even all that important anymore, because they don't have card catalogs anymore. Everything is digitized. Everything can be found. All the books can be found in all manner of ways, apart from going to the stacks. You just look for subject headings or the author's name or whatever, and you will find out the books that you have been signed or the books that you need. But instead, in order to maintain the falsehood that librarianship is some sort of, I don't know, branch of philosophy, one needs a master's in library science, and there is even, of course, doctorates in library science. And William Briggs directs us to a fellow called Eusebius and Twitter. He calls himself a Deutscher nationalist COVID-denying conspiracy platform, and he has a string on this subject. Okay, you ask for it, you get it. This will be Academia is Stupid, Part 1, Research. Almost all humanities and social science research in the Anglophone world happens at an extremely elementary level, and it is to a large degree repetitive, unoriginal, or wrong. Academia is Stupid, Part 2, Institutions. Since at least the 1990s, Anglophone unis, together with learned societies, etc., have been eaten alive by a leftist cultural and intellectual cancer, so that they no longer serve any purpose beyond that of political indoctrination. People have been, if you read the literature, if you read the conservative magazines, if you were reading National Review, say, or any of the other conservative magazines going back to the 1980s or before, you would have seen this story. Incredibly stupid thing happens at university. This is what they're teaching our children now. Well, I suppose there was something that could have been done about it in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or even later, which is that people would have said, look, I'm not contributing to this. My children are not going to go to these institutions. Why am I expected to pay incredible amounts of money for my children's brains to be poisoned, to make them unhappy, to make them freaks in many cases, to drive them insane? Why? Or alternately, for these students to rack up $30, $50, $70, $100,000 in debt and not be suitable for any job that pays a decent amount of money, or even, as one reads, about people graduating with PhDs, chasing down the worst kind of university jobs where you are worked to death and paid almost nothing and being grateful to have them. Of course, Joe Biden wants to pay 2 years of community college for all Americans, presumably those Americans who couldn't get into universities. I would have thought that community colleges were a sufficient joke already, without at least the first 2 years of them, and many community colleges it's a 2-year program. So Biden has in effect nationalized the community colleges of America. When I started working at the University of BC, what in 1973, at the time, a majority, I believe, failed an elementary reading test. All UBC students had to take an elementary test. It's just a very simple test, which demonstrated whether you were fluent in English. And about half or more of the students failed that test. Well, obviously, they shouldn't be in university, should they? If you don't know when the Battle of Hastings was, say, or, when the American Revolution was, let alone the English Revolution, say, if you don't know any of these things, what are you doing in a university? But no, apparently universities are an absolute good, despite all the evidence that we have that they are not absolute goods, that in most cases they are the opposite. The overproduction of elites leads to bad things happening. That it's not just these people owe a fortune and they haven't really learned anything because they weren't capable of it. They feel aggrieved. Where is their elite job? Why aren't they running things? Well, there's not that many, slots available, and they are jealously guarded. And typically, they are handed out to the children and the children of people who have them, or their friends, or lovers, and such like. It's not easy to get into the elite. So you have this vast aspirational class, which feels aggrieved and is genuinely aggrieved, has been genuinely hard done by. And this in the past has led politically and socially to, again, bad things happening. Let's take a look at the chat. English is the colonizer's language. Speaks Spanish, says Chogokin 666. I'm very amused by all these people with Spanish names carrying on about colonization. You ever heard of Cortez or Pizarro or many, 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 many others? No, but that's different. How? How is it different? How is it different? And I suppose all of these people who claim to be the victims of colonization, they're all Indios. Are they? No, strangely, a great many of them are not Indios. Not at all. Pure Castilian or the like. What else do we have there? Poison their brains is a great phrase, says Professor Paul. I do think that the universities, have a place and should have a valued place, but they're not for everybody and they're not for all things. We are doing people a disservice if we shove them in institutions where they shouldn't be. Michelle Obama, who I was talking about earlier in the live stream, she has a degree from Princeton. That's an Ivy League college, very distinguished. One would think that she would be quite pleased to be a Princeton graduate, but we know from her senior's thesis that she is not. It is a whine. It's the entirety of it is a whine of her learned experience that apparently the sole purpose of Princeton is to make young black women like Michelle Obama feel miserable. And I guess it did make her feel miserable for the simple reason that she shouldn't have been there. He's awakened so many spiritual realities, an amazing process, says Aslan. It's a reference to Roosh. Okay. He's Armenian Orthodox. Is he not? GC Stahl says librarianship. I'd imagine the third-party group from Office Space asking, so you don't check out the books or categorize them. What is it that you do here? True story. Okay. It comes up in the course of cataloging books, and I have cataloged tens of thousands of them, that the book could be categorized in more than one way. I'll give you an example. Let's say a book like Tom Wolfe's Hooking Up. Now, you could put this under the Library of Congress system, under American literature, which, if memory serves, is PS, begins with PS, or it could be considered a work of sociology. So you could categorize it beginning with HQ, if memory serves. The fact is, now it doesn't matter, because all you need to know is the name, the title of the book. If you go to a university library and you look up Tom Wolfe, you get a list of all his books that they have. Or you can, look for it by subject headings. And typically, books like this are given a lot of subject headings. I once witnessed an argument of this type between two librarians, and it was over the phone. It wasn't, PS versus HQ, but it was something like that. And they ended up shouting at each other. And then one librarian had physical possession of the book. And she said, okay, it's going under this classification, slams down the phone. Later, I found out that the other librarian, who was in a different building, actually had the book taken out off the shelf. And, I forget, what do they call pulling books or whatever, and sent to him so that he arranged to have it recategorized under in the place where he wanted it to be. Yes, this sort of thing actually did happen. Okay. DB Cooper says, in my grandfather's day, 5% of people had a university education. Today, it's about 33%. Clearly, we are much smarter than we were. No, obviously, we're much stupider. And there's a reason for that, is that everything has to be dumbed down. If 50% of, and I don't know that these numbers have changed, they may be higher, of the incoming students at the University of BC, which is considered one of Canada's leading universities, can't read English, then you're going to have to dumb everything down, aren't you? 5% seems reasonable to me. It's not, all that stringent, but and I would suggest that, the 5%, everything gets paid for them, because this would be a genuine investment in the future and not a phony one. So that's the show for today. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And I'm going to be talking about, on Theater Thursday, a very strange film from Japan from 1977, which has become a cult film. It's called Hausu, or House, directed by Nobuhiko Obayashi. On the book club on Friday, I mentioned this during the live stream, a book which has really made me think. It has really made me, reconsider several things. It's by John Chapman, which I gather is not his real name. I don't know what his real name is. It's called Cultured Drugs, and it is, of course, independently produced. And on Music Monday, on May the 17th, I'm going to be talking about the Glenn Gould cult. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you'd like to support this live stream with a donation, which would be very appreciated at this, shall we say, uncertain time in my life, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada and you would like to make a donation to this live stream, you can do it directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse. I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.